Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this month for Data Platform Down Under. Once again, my name's Warwick Rudd and I'll be your host for today's session. In today's session, we've got Ginger Grant talking to us all the way from Arizona, and she's going to be talking to us about moving away from data flows and simplifying data pipelines in Synapse Analytics. This session is being recorded and will be made available on the Data Platform Down Under YouTube channel. If you do have any questions throughout the session, feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat window, which I will be monitoring, and we'll be able to get those answered for you at any point in time. Ginger may have some breakpoints, or we'll wait until the end, okay, depending on what your questions are, but feel free to interact just like you would in a in-person event. So with that, I won't hold up the proceedings any further. I'll hand over to Ginger to take us through this month's session.
Great, thank you very much, Warren. Assuming you're all good with seeing my screen at this point.
Yes, I can see your slide deck.
So this session actually started out because I working at a client, and they were doing all of this stuff with data flows, and the client is not doesn't know anything about data flows, and also the code is very complicated when walking through it because it's so much of it is buried. And I went to a session that somebody else did, and they said, "Why are we still doing with data? Why is everybody still using data flows when we've got the ability to write stuff in notebooks, which can be read, right? Much cleaner, and you can use SQL, which more of my clients have an understanding of than do Data Factory. For some reason, I just don't see a lot of Data Factory knowledge in my workplace who I'm interacting with, but I do see a lot of people that know SQL. So this is kind of what this moving away from data flows is what it takes advantage of. It takes advantage of the skill set of people who know SQL, which I assume most of you do. So, all right. So a little bit about me. My name is Grant. I am still in Microsoft Data Platform MVP, just having been renewed recently, and a Microsoft certified trainer. I run my own data science consultancy where I do a lot of different things with data, including data science when I get a chance. And I wrote a book on cognitive services last year, and I'm presently reviewing the tech review and one on Power BI. So let's talk about Synapse migration process. So this is generally speaking how Synapse works. Some people use the whole bronze, silver, and gold. And this is generally speaking the kinds of data that we have to we want to work with. Reference naturally is just that, where you might have any kind of reference data. In my present engagement, I have reference being the number of Salesforce objects that I am using so that I can use variables for that. I'm also going to be including things like abbreviations, standard country and state abbreviations, because I'm noticing some of the data is messed up and I want the data to be in a postal acceptable format. And then I will be sending things to archive. Generally speaking, I'd say that till later. Once we're happy with the way that the process is going. Generally speaking, archive is going to be different kind of data storage than is the rest of them is, because I want to take advantage of the fact that I don't use it very much and go to cold storage that is not global available. So this is where the data is going to go. So it's going to move through these different areas. So how do we make this happen? Well, like I said, we could use data pipelines and do everything that way. Now, one thing that always comes up, and it's funny because I was talking to some people about Microsoft, and they're like, "Oh, you should just use data flows." And hey, if you're going to use data flows, be aware that they're not cheap. So if you are going to be running a nightly process and you were doing everything as a data flow, or you did quickly dragging stuff like SSIS, you will pay for it. It is not uh, a cheap process to use. Yeah, you can monitor it relatively easily, but that is one method of doing transforming data. But the goal is that to create a well-organized data lake. There's really more than one kind of data pipeline that you can create with this, and so they can be, of different kinds. And I'm not a purist. I'm going to use the tools and the best ones for the job. And many times that means that I'm not going to be doing any paperwork. So with reality, sometimes this process is just insanely complicated. I have seen lookups and buried SQL and all of this and renaming that you have to go through pre-screen stuff. Fine. And it just seems silly to me that you would bother to do that when really all I could do is I could do the whole thing in a SQL statement, which would be more visible to the users. Merging and joining data, the number of steps that it takes to do that in a data flow, I think kind of excessive. And with the way that you have to write the joins. And the development patterns vary. Ideally, people, say that they do this and that other people can follow their code, but it's not necessarily easy to do that when you're looking through the actual code that someone may be generating. So with integration, also ADF, because what's in Synapse, it's the same thing as ADF. It just doesn't do lift and shift, which is kind of it anyway. But in the ADF environment, you develop data flows to migrate your data to your data. And you transfer, and how you're going to be doing this is to connecting to your different data sources and write to different locations in data lakes, create pipelines and monitor pipelines. Standard method of doing this. I like ADS for a couple of considerations. If you are connecting to something weird, something that is not SQL data, any kind of a Azure database, or anything you might need an API for, and then you might want to look at using some portion of ADF because it handles that very, very well. You don't have to get into writing APIs, but you're going to have to watch these complex pipelines that end up getting created because they can be somewhat difficult to maintain, and sometimes finding where issues occur can be rather difficult because of the different message qualities of it. And the Azure spend can be considerable for this kind of environment. So I just wanted to kind of show a classic kind of thing that I'm talking about where it gets to be rather complicated. And I'm logging into Azure again because okay. So let me show you this particular pipeline, and this is basically just creating a hash table and copying a number of things to Parquet. So it's doing a whole bunch of stuff, looking things up, and then it gets it into different things for different data flows for different elements. And all of this is just to load up a calendar table. Because all that you're really doing is doing some deriving a calendar, which I'm sure all of you have seen before. I know I've got some on my blog for this, and then adding it to a file within a curated format for this kind of environment. So this is the kind of thing that I think is not necessarily, it can be done a lot cleaner. For things that I do think use a stage it if you can't get it in the way and then orchestrate it. Yeah. One thing that I do like to do, and I'll show you another example of stuff that I do think is a good use of doing PDF is I've got a pipeline here. And here, all I'm doing is I'm getting the data. The reason that I'm going through all of this innovation is because I'm getting it from Salesforce and I'm using the linked process to do. And if I was to write that in Python, it would be very difficult to do. So all I'm doing here is getting my stuff from Salesforce, and here I'm getting a whole bunch of stuff from Salesforce, in particular Salesforce, I'm getting this from SharePoint, and it's just easier to get it that way. And that's the only kind of things that I do. But the kind of logic here that I'm doing is just that I'm not doing anything really complicated because I'm trying to get my data into a raw area. So for this kind of thing, I could see, yeah, doing it. But again, all this contains a simple copy activity what it's writing to. So just going to write it. So I'm just staging. And once I have it staged, then I can do more things with it. So that's the kind of thing that I think is kind of a good process that you might wish to implement for looking at things and yeah. And I'm seeing, Greg was saying that, uses the ADF to stage the data into SQL and then orchestrate it. Exactly. And I'm doing it a similar way, except for the fact that I'm not loading into a SQL database. My current customer is a nonprofit, and they're trying to be as cheap as possible. They don't have a lot of data, but the data that they have is weird, and it's in a lot of strange places. And they want to be able to connect to Power BI. So as long as I have less than 10 gigs of data, I can do the whole thing and I'm able to use it, which is of course my goal. Is so that I don't have to run the costs up because they are trying to keep it. So instead of using database, I am dumping it into files, and then I can do external file analysis and as a Synapse on top of them. I know that doesn't perform as well, of course, as a database. Just the reasons for doing some of this as well. All right, so that's looking at different kinds of pipelines or doing things that are somewhat complex and needless. The other process that I like to incorporate instead is basically once I've got the data loaded, my goal is to make sure that my raw is exactly that. It's raw data that I'm getting from my different sources. And since my sources can be from one of the different databases, Excel files, which I like to transform because Excel files a difficult to do things with. When I'm using those, then I transform everything into a template. Into raw when what we can do. And I do that because it increases the ongoing storage costs, and then it's easier for me to deal with it within the system. So with the notebook process, basically once I've got my data into raw, and how I get my data into raw, if it's really easy, if I can get it from the SQL database, then I would do that in a notebook as well. I would see no reason to use any of the components in ADF for getting my data because I can just get it from SQL Server without anything in Azure. But once I've got it into raw, then what I probably am going to do is transform it. I do want that raw data. I don't want to mess with that raw data, but I am going to play with the data. Right now, I'm getting a whole bunch of getting everything from Salesforce. And to be honest, most of the stuff that they're not using at this point in time, so I'm just ignoring a lot of it. So I'm going to be doing it a lot in Python to just get the data that I need, transform the data, and then join the data. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use it. And my client really likes this because they're ADF novices, they're Azure novices. And my goal, of course, as a consultant is to give them something that they can support. Now you're like, no, I know they don't. But I'm trying to write my Python in a way so that it's primarily using SQL, which they do. That makes it a lot easier. Oh, by the way, it's also quite a bit more cost effective. And then if I need a database, what I'm going to do is in my curated area, then I can create a virtual database on top of that, and they can do factory on that should they do so, so that they can do any kind of SQL queries that they want. And then of course I'm going to be loading all the data to Power BI, and that's so with a notebook, I can handle larger files. One of the things that I don't know if Warwick has done this class too, but I occasionally do some consulting work for a company that does a lot of training for Azure partners. And one of the classes is they call it Synapse 300, and they tell you that you can have a 2 terabyte file and you need to load it. Well, if you try to load that, you and it's also so that's something also that you need to consider is that if your files are really large, you're going to have issues with it. And so, and it also if you've got like to parse a bunch of JSON and maybe fix some of the problems that are wrong with your JSON, and that's going to be something that you're going to have issues with as well. And with a notebook, depending on, of course, how you write it, I have found that it is less Azure spend than doing something in Azure Data Fact in using data flows because it's a lot more straightforward. And I can choose to do different tools given the type of resources that people are looking to do. So I can play around with that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to incorporate these notebooks into a pipeline so I have that process running so that I'm running them together, but it's more like so notebook. I will say that you do have to have some decent set of Python skills. And it's very important that you write when you code and use markdown because yes, you can make a mess of anything. Python is no different. You can write very unintelligible Python code, just like you can write very hard to understand code. You still are going to need to incorporate pipelines for a trigger process. It may or may not reduce complexity. People done on their files. So there's things you need to consider when you're doing this, like whether or not this is the best method of using, but I do find it to be easier for people who don't understand PDF. So my goal when I'm writing this is to decrease the level of complexity. So what that means is that you have to be really aware of what you're doing and try not to write really long notebooks. A couple of reasons for that. One of them, it's more complex to do with always a consideration. And you don't want to bury the code. You want to separate it out so that each element is in a different task, which makes it easy to understand. So, and of course, if there is a, use the best and using the best tool for the job. So, I'm doing a little bit of a merge of the two. So I'm not going to just do, I'm always going to be using some of the ADF components because frankly, I like the triggering capability. The triggering capability, I'm not going to rewrite all that one. So I'll always do that. I may, in the example that I showed you earlier, use something to get the data if I have to, get it from Facebook. So if I'm getting it from SQL, though, I won't bother with that. I'll probably just do it. But I will use the integration portion so that I can have the nice triggering capability. But after I get into raw, that's when I think that will take a whole lot of time. Because at that point, I can just do everything. And I do that in SQL. So my integration pipeline is then incorporating all of these different elements together. For raw, this I might be using an integration, an ADF component for this. For structured, that's going to be in Smart. So basically, Smartsheet. mean, I know it's Python, but I'm writing a lot of SQL when I'm writing it. And then for staging, again, that's going to be Spark. Reference, it depends. Generally speaking, my reference stuff is small. And to be honest, most of the time I just upload. It's a big deal. So I just upload my reference files because I don't really see a reason to incorporate a whole process. For curated is going to be Spark. I'm going to write something in a file structure that is a data warehouse, like Synapse. And I may do data marks depending on what I'm loading. Now, generally speaking, I do load things to Power BI, but I will also, if you want to, or if it just makes sense, is load something to, or to, if you want to, dedicate it for within Anderson. I have a customer recently who does a lot of defense department work, but they don't really take care about their Azure resources. And they did their Azure bill was basically enough to buy a small car every month, maybe they're tiny. But for the kind of things that I tend to look at, and most of my customers have a lot less to go than that. So I try to see if we can get away with just putting in my curated area, creating a database on top of that and see if that would be acceptable from a performance perspective as a database. And if it is not, hey, great, load it up into SQL, load it up into whatever you like. But let's not do that unless you have established a need. And once I have it in curated format, if I want to load it up into SQL, it's relatively a trivial task anyway, because I've already gone through all the processes that I need to make a file structure format that I would want to put into a database or something. Generally speaking, mine are portable. And then for archiving, I'll probably integrate that because again, I'm going to kick off some kind of a process pipeline to just copy whatever. So again, I'm trying to keep my pipeline integration stuff into just things that I'm going to be doing content and not embed logic within. So just kind of keeping it simple and then writing as much SQL as I can possibly do that. So one way of doing that, I might, it depends for reference data. I have code to create a date table in Python, so I might do that. It's just something that I've got the code for, and I'm probably going to be playing around with that. So next thing I want to do is basically go back and examine my pipeline that I have here and trying to call my load. So what I've got here is I got my lookup. So what I'm doing here is I am just looking up a file that I have in my root and my reference system for the objects that I'm going to look up. So I know that I need to access this list of objects. So I just put them on here as text, and I'm going to go ahead and load those up. And that's what my integration with that does. And then I'm going to write all of this data to them. And when I do that, I am going to write them all out. Again, relatively easy to do. All I have to do is say that I wanted this parquet, and then I have a bunch of parquet data that I got from using my link. I said this is using my source is using Salesforce, so I've got a Salesforce link in here. If I was to, I wouldn't probably ever do this kind of thing in Python just because of all the integration capabilities that are already in integration or ADF. It just makes it easier, very easy to do things like add, putting all my connection information, making sure that it's all secure, and I can do that really easy in a link. So when in my after I've written it to, then the next thing that I would do would be to write into my notebook. So the notebooks that I had are basically looking at doing those here. So this is the kind of code that I was going to be doing. So I've got my data loaded into raw. So we'll go here and take a look. So this is where I've got my raw data loaded, got Salesforce data. I'm going to be also implementing at some point in time Alpha. So they wanted to have a month snapshot view of the data for whatever reason. So they go back here with this or this is just the names of the files that come over straight from Synapse. And then once that I have this written incorporated into the pipeline, I'm going to start moving this into stage. So this is my counted stage area. All I'm doing here is referencing the name of the account and then my relative path. And then I'm also going to where I'm going to be writing it. So I'm going to be writing this as Delta, which sounds really hard, but I have to say right format Delta. So then I can add this to a Delta format. So once I have my data, then all I need to do is then start loading it up. So we'll notice here that while that sounds complicated, if we look here, we see that these are the names. And I'm just referencing those in my code. So going into here, we see that I've got one called account K, got everything listed. So I'm just going to read that into a data frame. And I'm going to call that, and I'm reading it as part K, because if you look at this is part K. And then I can take a look at the data. Now, I just did that basically because I knew that I was doing a demo for you guys. Generally speaking, I wouldn't keep this in production code. You can see I've got a whole bunch of columns that I got on here. It was in question for whether or not I'm going to need it. So I just grabbed it. But I don't think I'm going to use all this. Matter of fact, I'm only going to load the stuff that I know that I'm going to use. Again, keeping the raw data, so perhaps we can go after it later. But I'm going to go ahead and do some fancy SQL to get just the stuff that I want. So, and then I'm going to load the other files that I've got. It's what is contact information, contact, birth record, and this is enrollment. And so I'm just all putting them into data frames, and you can see these are the names of the data frames that I gave them. So if I want to write SQL on top of my data frame, all I have to do is use this command, which is create or replace text view. And so this is going to create an in-memory table for me so that I can just run through. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So I can, if I wanted to, I could just really just write code. Like I'm just going to do it here just to show you how to do that. So I can just do, I could say select, and this is straight up ANSI SQL. So nothing, because that's what Spark uses. So get your dust off your Ghost code books because it's not. I always forget. But if you just want to take a look at it and write any kind of SQL that you want, right, and just run it with anything. And I have to start. Really, all I would need to do, and then I could take a look at any of all of my data that I've got. Like, starting on have it on a pretty aggressive turn on. But I could do something like this and just take a look at all of my data. So once I've written some SQL, played around with it later, enrollment, just do some analysis, and then I'm just going to write the SQL that I want. So I wrote a SQL statement, basically says, yeah, I got all of these different elements here. I don't And I'm doing my research. So this isn't very type one to take all this. I'm just basically saying, yeah, call idea account ID, and name, and then give me the ones where the record type is the standard record type and it is deleted again. That's one of the ones that we're deleting. And so what am I going to do with this? I am going to load this into a table, and I'm going to write this table into my table. So because I know that I don't need the rest of my data. So I'm going to, pretty much repeat that process for all of my files and just write SQL statements to get the different elements that I want out of them. And then I can then, write those to staging. So, and do any kind of reviews that I want to. I can also do joins if I need to do joins. I will also be creating a table, another table out of these tables because I'm going to want to separate my addresses. And then I'm just going to write those to my staging. So I will do the same process for taking my data and putting it to curated. In that step, I'm also going to, this is one data source. So I'm going to be taking data from another couple of data sources, loading them all into Stage, joining them and putting them into curated. Once they're curated, they're in a format that in a data warehousing format where I've got my facts, and I've got my dimensions, and then I'm going to be using that to connect with Power BI. In this, I can do that, one of two ways. From in Synapse, I can either do it, through the database that I create for them, those tables, or I can just be connecting straight Power BI to my curated data lake and then bring those into Power BI. Just use it. Doesn't really matter. But I always create the database so people have the ability to query and they can query anything they want. Any other database tools they wanted to do. So, but if you'll notice, this isn't like horribly. I'm assuming that everybody on this call is not, like super into Python, but you'll notice, and all my logic is all going to be in SQL. So I'm not coding here. And I find this to be, and I'm making sure that I'm using my phone so people understand it. And, if I leave it to 10 records, I can comment this out of the code. So if later on someone they can see what I'm doing and walk through it. And I'm confident that my users who are basically coming from SSRS are not going to have any problems with understanding what I'm doing so that I can use and not what their input is. The kind of code that I'm doing. So I basically, this is how I'm basically doing this. So instead of course, doing data factory, I'm going to add my notebooks and then put all of my notebooks into my pipeline, run the pipeline, and then have that be how it's triggered, how it's written, get the information. Then with that, I still have my capabilities here to monitor my pipelines. Here. All of them, so I can use the same kind of information for doing that. And you can see these are the different pipeline ones that I have done, and making sure that they all work and I'm able to do that. And you can take a look at the different steps. But any questions as to is to that process and what how you might do that again? So I'm just going to be basically taking this, loading my data to raw, and then going to load all of my data using notebooks. With that, that was pretty much all I had to talk about this. I'd love to hear any of your input. Let me know if you have any questions about anything that I presented. I'm really interested in hearing from you. Last time we made this conference, a lot of people were all on top of me for saying bad things about data flows, but I just find them in my buying clients that they're And I also, like the pipelines that I had seen people write, I thought that they took an extraordinary amount of sleep that I didn't think it was good. And this is more. So, any questions?
So, Greg, you've got your hand up. If you want to come off of mute and ask Ginger your question.
Hi, yeah. Thanks, Warwick. Yeah, I didn't know if we were using our hands today or not, but nonetheless. Hey, Ginger, can you put back up the very first pipeline you showed?
Oh, the one that's complicated?
And it had the errors, and it was the thing before that, yeah.
Yeah, because all of this is to just load.
Now there was one you put up before that, actually.
Oh, this one.
Nope. It was one that had an error thing, and it had a bunch of links to get the error. Nope.
Got me on that one. It might have been.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
I was just noting that's a really, really common mistake that I see, is note that lookup, the failure would never run. And it's because the error the error output, you'd have to have an error in every other stage for that to run. And that's not possible.
I did not like, this is an example of.
Yeah, no, it's really funny. I just thought it was worth pointing out because I see this in so many pipelines, and somebody thinks it works kind of like the old SSIS thing with, do this and then run off that way.
Yeah.
But it was the same issue with SSIS. You used to have to change it to a logical OR, where it's actually a logical AND. And unfortunately, in ADF and Synapse Analytics, there's no way to change it.
Yeah.
It's a real pain in the neck. It's like,
I'm a fan of this kind of stuff. And this is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
For what it's doing.
But their solution to that at the moment is you copy that failure end time thing and attach it to every one of those other tasks.
Yeah, well, it's copied.
Or you have to sort of run sub pipelines. Anyway, it just goes on and on. But it's just so painful that there's no or.
Yeah.
That's like, there's some things with ADF we just find it so easy to work with, and other things, you just want to hit yourself in the head all the time. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Some of the stuff is just crazy. And to be honest, fact that this is the one that kills me. Because
yeah,
I don't have Python code for this. I can do this.
I mean, to me, there's also the simplest things. Like if I have, if you look at the data types for variables and things, they don't have numbers, and so every time I work with a number, I've got to take a string, turn it into a number, and then if I want to add one to the number, you also find that you can't put the calculation of a variable back into the same variable. So you actually have to calculate it and put it in another variable, and then you've got to copy it back into the previous variable. You just go, all I want to do is add one to a number. It's like so complicated. Yeah. So anyway.
It's just, yeah, and I'm with you on that. The thing is that like, this is, I can actually shut up because this actually generated quite a bit of ongoing something relevant. But I thought that would be because they don't, because the customer doesn't understand how to flow on it.
Yeah. Yeah, as I was saying in the comments here, we tend to use ADF to bring data in if I can't reach out from SQL and get it some other way, like external tables, or if I copy CSV files, I'll often copy them into Azure storage and then bring them in with Open Rosette, or there's other ways that can get the same thing. But we just then tend to use ADF to orchestrate the SQL and just do it in SQL. And the other big advantage of that is it just works so well with version controls and what freaks me when I see a lot of SQL in a notebook is things like if you go to change the database, how do you find that code? And so on. But yeah, and versions and data flows are the same thing. It was like, how do you roll back to a different version or see what changed between versions of a data flow and so on? It's like, Anyway, thanks, Ginger.
Because that's a good point, because I mean, that's the other thing too with notebooks. So easy to see what you guys did. And yes, you need to get smarter about doing variables, and I didn't do that, but you can get smarter so you can change it out easier. Kevin, you have a question?
Yes, hi. Yes, thanks for the demo there. We're just starting out on our Azure migration from in-house SSIS, really, and I'd be interested to know what tools or how you handle dealing with hundreds of different files and databases or database tables. We're looking at a Microsoft repository on GitHub called Azure Data Services Go Fast Codebase, or ADS. I don't know if you've heard of that. If you don't use that, then what do you use to bring in, rather than hard code hundreds of file names? We want to be able to go, hey, here's a folder, suck it all in, or here's a database, suck all the tables.
Well, so I'm doing something like that. I've got a list, and I'm sucking everything off the board. I do have to have a name to be able to do that. But I know that if you're talking about connecting to a database, I know how to write that in Python, so I could just say I could do a select statement, get the list, and then run it. So I could write code for that. If I was connecting to a database, because I could just get the SQL object, get the object names out of it, create a list, and then use that as a variable to build it.
Yeah. So you don't tend to use additional tools to orchestrate the movement of data from on-site to I forget the name, source staging.
Yeah, I mean, that's
names you want to call.
Yeah, so if you've got on-premise data, you're going to be using an on-prem data gateway to get that data out.
That's right.
And so if you're doing that, though, there's pretty decent tools that I could do to do that in Python if I didn't want to just straight up do something where I'm doing a load. But I could actually do that in a for each statement too if I wanted to. Like, I don't feel like dealing with that in Python because it's so complicated. I could write that as well. I either have it in a metadata table where I've loaded all the data names in there and load this in here as well. So,
that's what I thought you'd say. Thank you very much. So really, you're saying there's no additional tool set really needed. Everything's already built into Spark or Synapse.
Yeah, but you could do it as an integration task where you're doing a for each when you're doing it from a metadata table, or you could write it in Python. But I do think that does require a little bit more knowledge. You might say, through that, and just do it for just loading data. But I'm a real big believer in having that raw data, because sometimes you just need it. Because my goal is, of course, to create a curated environment, but I like to do machine learning. Every single client I talk to, they think it's a really good idea. They get to come back and pay you to do it. But since they want to be able to someday do machine learning, I can leave that raw data alone, so that, hey, it's also good validation perspective if someone says that the data will back. That's exactly how it works. So that's why I always like do the load. And plus, data storage. I will change the format to make it easier to put.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? What do you think? You Mark, ready to write some Python?
Yeah, so as Ginger said, feel free to either put your hand up like Greg or Kevin have done, put them in the chat. As we mentioned at the start of the session, this session has been recorded, so you can come back and watch this at any point in time on the Data Platform Down Under YouTube channel. We still have some time if you do want to ask some questions. So while you're thinking about those, I would like to thank Ginger for her time, for taking us through the moving away from data flows and using pipelines in Azure Synapse. And yes, I haven't played with Synapse Analytics. I have played with notebooks, just not with Python. I normally talk to other people who do Python.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole goal with this is basically when you're writing Python, I'm trying to write a lot of things. And it's just because my whole my client base I understand. And so, hey, write for SQL you don't have to in Spark, you don't have to write, Python code. And you only write SQL, supports it. It's all you have to do is figure out how you're going to set up your connections, and then after that, then you're good.
Right.
Yeah, and I can do anything that I want fit using a SQL. So I can do joins, updates, whatever I want. I don't have to write Python.
Making life easier for people to use the UX to achieve your outcomes.
Yeah, and I don't expect my clients they will not become Python experts and they will not become ADF experts just because I don't see that in their what's important to them in their business. But they will kind of get people where they are. Why is he put Martin on hold?
He must have put himself on hold.
I just thought that was because he was being moved.
All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions, then you can all have some time back for your Tuesday. Ginger can get some time back for her day and finish off her evening without having too late a evening talking to us. Thank you, Ginger, for coming along and presenting for us. And I look forward to seeing everybody next month, where we have, let me just bring up quickly. Did I not? I'm sure I had it up. Next month. Sorry about this. Where next month we will be talking about deploying the Azure Cosmos DB using the Bicep language and GitHub Actions. We've got that coming to us from Will Valida, who actually works for Microsoft. So that'll be a fantastic session for those of you who are interested in Cosmos DB. So with that, I look forward to seeing you all again next month. Thank you once again, Ginger, for your time. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today and being part of this month's session.
Thank you. Hey, Martin.
Yes, Warwick.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.